All right, so in this podcast slash YouTube video, I aim to explore the theme, what is intermediate meditation? Got a few thoughts on this, and I think might be helpful. So who this aimed at, who it's not. If you've never done meditation before, never heard of meditation, it's not for you. If you've been meditating 20 years plus, and you're teaching meditation, you're deep in it, you've done maybe more than a dozen retreats, it's probably not for you either. Still might be interesting. Who it's for. So this is some thoughts, and it really is thinking out loud about meditation for people that maybe you've done a bit of meditation. You've done, somewhere between a few months and a few years of meditating pretty regularly, might be on and off, probably learned mindfulness breath, probably learned body scanning, basic Theravada or insight meditation techniques, may have learned metta meditation, heart practices, you've listened to your Jack Cornfields and your Tara Bracks and your Sharon Salzbergs, or you've been to Gaia House in England, or you've done a Vipassana retreat with the Gwenka style. This is pretty normal. Some of you listening to this have maybe just got an app. I can recommend some of my favorite apps to go a bit more intermediate. Maybe you've been on Headspace or something like that. My first meditation app, whatever. Not my first thing. It's kind of like Fisher Price, my first, whatever. Those kind of things, great. That's all good. What's next? What else is there if you've done a bit of that? So years ago, I've been teaching basic meditation as part of my embodiment work. I'm not a full-time meditation teacher, but as part of my embodiment courses for about a dozen years. It's not that long in meditation circles, and there's certainly more qualified people than me. If I was in the company of Buddhist monks, for example, I'd be a bit embarrassed to call myself a meditation teacher. But I have got reasonable experience on this. I'm noticing that there's a lot of far less qualified meditation teachers in terms of their personal practice and the research I'm noticing now coming through from online trainings. I've got a lot of students now, though. It used to be, I'd say, right, let's learn to meditate. Who's meditated before? And be a group of, say a dozen people, one hand would go up, maybe one hardcore Buddhist, yeah? Nowadays, it's most of my students. So if I'm training coaches or yoga teachers or anyone who's a little bit alternative, it's pretty much everyone who's done some kind of meditation. If I'm training even business people, it'll be half the room have got some kind of app or tried it, Google sent them on a course or something, right? So I was like, wow, things have really changed. Maybe what people need is not so much just the absolute basic instructions, but the next step up. And I'm going to call this intermediate in inverted commas, because who's to say what's intermediate? A hardcore Buddhist might say, what do you mean, like halfway to full enlightenment, wait for full arahant status? Like, what do you mean? We could call it like next step meditation. What's next meditation? I think that would be just as good a title for this. And I think there's a lot of people now. There's a lot of people. And I'm also noticing a lot of people do some basics, but then maybe not much more. They don't even know there's anything more. Right? There's a lot of my mentees, for example, I taught them something quite simple the other day, and they were like, what's this? And, only one of 20 had heard of it. And I was like, this is actually not that advanced from a Buddhist point of view. Okay, therein lies some of the problems. So in order to popularize meditation, it was taken out of a Buddhist context. There are other kinds of meditation, but pretty much the good shit is Buddhist. Okay, I'm sorry. There are some other influences. I mean, even like the Christian meditation people have gone to Buddhism to try and rediscover meditation, which did used to exist more deeply in the Christian faith. Thomas Merton and stuff. However, we're basically looking at Buddhism. I'm sorry, guys, but that's all there is to it. But in order to popularize it, and they secularized it, so John Kabat-Zinn, other people onwards, said, we're not really looking at Buddhism, we're just going to take out the meditation bit. Now, in doing that, often people with not that much training became meditation teachers. People that had spent 6 months in Asia or 6 months as a monk, maybe. You still see this now, people have written a book and they're like, my 6 months as a monk. I'm like, imagine if someone said, I studied medicine for 6 months and now I'm inventing a whole new school of being a doctor. You'd be like, that's a bit confident, let's say. Yeah. And I would say you're really trying to strip it out from that full context is the first mistake. And the first thing to come back to, if you've done a little bit of body scanning or breath meditation and you go, that's nice, I feel a bit better, generally I'm a bit calmer. So what might we come back to? Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path. I mean, these are definitely things you should look up. I mean, meditation was never meant to be done completely out of context, right? And that context was Eightfold Path. One of the other models from basic Buddhist models, the one I mentioned I introduced my students to the other day, that was the five hindrances. I mean, this is pretty basic in any Buddhist monastery. I'm going to call it intermediate here because it's not that known. And for a meditator to work with the hindrances, not just to listen to one lecture on it, but to have it available so you can at any point go, okay, what's getting in the way here? Super helpful, super helpful. The Theravadas tend to have lists, by the way, numbered lists to help them remember things. So 5 hindrances or the 7 factors of awakening, that might be another one you could start looking into. But there's whole areas that are pretty critical, like ethics. No one teaches ethics. So Buddhism, these things like right speech, right livelihood, etc. No one talks about that. It's sort of uncool to talk about that in the West. Like we're supposed to be sort of beyond morality. You hear people say, no right, no wrong. Yeah, wouldn't necessarily recommend that if you want to deepen your meditation anyway. So looking at ethics, it's remarkable. Or like, in a lot of Buddhist countries, what's taught is dharma, is giving. Okay, generosity as the cure for grasping. Yeah, that is a practice in Thailand, feeding monks, for example, right? They've formalized it in various ways. But it's not so popular. Maybe they just call it, collecting the dana at a meditation retreat, and it just means taking money. You've sort of got this weird situation where a lot of meditation teachers in the West, they're sort of demi-monastics. So they're sort of acting like monastics, but not really. And I don't know how healthy that is. It's sort of half and half, right? And it's not to say that the monastic path is the only one or even the best one, but the sort of slightly strange half and half, but in the world, but trying not to be of it, the kind of thing you'll see you see that in yoga too, actually. Yeah, maybe at an intermediate level, one might examine some of where things come from, or the Christian influence on meditation in the West. That takes some looking at. Another one would be the therapeutic influence in the West, which it could be something really positive, like trauma-informed mindfulness. But sometimes it's actually getting in the way of the practice. It's not helpful, or at least needs distinguishing, separating out. So you might want to research that. There's various people that have written on that topic over the years, either combining or kind of showing how something's got kind of in the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings, in the West. It might be worth looking at. Another one I'd say is the sort of social, particularly on the West Coast, the kind of neo-Marxist social justice ideology has come into Dharma in a big way. And that looks like a kind thing, but in my experience often ends up being something else. I mean, if nothing else, it scares off half of the population of the States, and probably the same in the UK. I remember going into a retreat and there was all these things written on the wall that were just nothing to Buddhism. They come from, straight out of Berkeley. And I just remember thinking, God, I feel completely uncomfortable here now. This is not who I am or what I came for. Yeah, we can argue that one out, but certainly worth being aware of that those influences have kind of crept in. What else does intermediate practice mean? Well, okay, so concentration practice, calming practice, not really the point of meditation, though. Not really the point. We're looking for insight. So how would we develop that? Different ways, different strategies, but thinking about that. We might start looking at jhanas, which are deep states of concentration. Rob Babea's, this might be getting into the advanced territory, but something to look forward to. Rob Babea's jhana retreat you can find online would be a good place to start. Various people have talked about this. You go to the advanced levels, you're really talking about super normal operating, not just meditate to reduce stress. That's just getting to normal. Ajahn Sona, Sona, is a very good source on YouTube of a lot of these things from a traditional Theravadan point of view. Rob Babea from Gaia House, deceased now, but loads of good content online. Be someone else who I'd say regularly speaks at sort of at least an intermediate level. Purbea, I think. They're people I looked at. And there's, you could look up Shinzen Young, definitely will give you a more advanced framework. His Bright Mind app, run by my friend Toby Sola, Bright Mind app would be a good one there. The Buddhify app is a sort of beginner's app, but starts to get a bit more to it, I would say, than some. But certainly the Shinzen system, you're really looking at a pretty comprehensive system of understanding mindfulness. You can find downloads online, or you can use Toby's app to get deeper into that. And I think, developing a more advanced framework, whether it's Shinzen's secular framework or taking on, say, the Theravadan framework, which is just beautiful. The Tibetan framework, of course, exists. Some of my colleagues like Karin swear by it. I've only studied it a little bit. Tibetan framework, I'd say, is very difficult to separate out the cultural side. The Dalai Lama, who I adore, basically said, he did say, let's see if I'm quoting right, something to the meaning of, I don't know what's Tibetan and what's Buddhist. That's for you to figure out. I thought it was very interesting. And I'd say in Tibetan Buddhism, there is that sort of slightly guru-y thing, slightly magical feel sometimes, certainly colorful, gods with many arms, interesting sort of Hindu type influences. I think it's definitely advanced. Definitely you can get in some intermediate stuff into that. It's colorful. My sense is that for many people, that exoticism is an attraction, but also potentially a barrier. I am a bit biased, though. Karin will probably say something else. She's well into Bhutanese Buddhism, which, like Tibetan Buddhism, has that similar flavor. And then on Zen. So for some people, Zen is the intermediate practice, the koan practice, or Rinzai Zen. Sometimes it's just the level of rigor in a retreat. Now, saying that, most like insight meditation retreats in Spirit Rock, Gaia House, those kind of places, in the West, they're pretty rigorous. Like a lot of periods of silence, the classic Glencorn of like 10 days, sit, walk, barely any time off. I wouldn't recommend that for beginners. I'd say that's an intermediate level retreat. What I would say is if you've just been doing an app or doing your 10 or 20 minutes in the morning for stress relief, great, good for you, great start, no problem, don't hurt anyone. Time to do a retreat. So what would be that? Those kind of, 7, 10 day or 2 week retreats, you just get to a deeper level of practice. I was quite surprised actually the other day. I was teaching workshops and who's meditating? Of 30 people, 29 of them had meditated, but only 2 of them had done a retreat. I was like, that's a bit weird, because back in the day, if I was to get the Brighton Buddhist Centre 15 years ago, for example, 20 years ago, actually everyone in there who'd meditated for more than a few months had gone on a retreat, at least 5-day or weekend retreat. That's a good 3 or 5 days with semi-silence is a good place to start if you're not done a retreat. But yeah, certainly 1 or 2 retreats a year, I think, is helpful if you want to take your practice a little bit more seriously. You could do more, depends on your life situation, kids, money, time off, etc. But, I think I've got 3 booked in this year, 5 days, 7 days, and 12 days. That's pretty good for me. If I do 1 or 2 in the year, I'm normally pretty happy. The year I had the biggest breakthroughs in my meditation, I did 2 week retreats with just a few weeks in between. Like a sandwich like that can be helpful. The other thing I've done a few times, which I really recommend if you want to take it up a notch, is a solitary retreat. Probably 5 days is good for a beginner, assuming your mental health is good. And I'll come to that in a minute, actually. Like do a solitary retreat if you've already done a group retreat, or a silent retreat if you've done one with talking. And I'm not talking about a fucking yoga holiday, okay, where you drink wine and chat around the table and hook up with boys with nice anterior deltoids or whatever the kids do these days, okay? I'm not talking about that. As a holiday, holidays are great, fucking love holidays, but we're talking about something different, all right? So another one, if you can't do retreats, just be like, and people like Shinzen offer like home retreats as well. It would be like just duration of practice. So, doing 10, 20 minutes, great. 30, 40 minutes, once or twice a day. Up it, yeah? Now, what would be the limit of that? I did experiment with this a while back, about 10 years ago. I thought, how much meditation can you do? And I got to 4 hours a day, and it actually reduced my need for sleep. So it's actually relatively easy. That happens in some cases. But I started getting a bit weird. So after a few months of that, I stopped. And then someone pointed out to me, if I was a monk, that would be fine. Even monks don't often meditate 4 hours a day for that long. They have periods where they do that, retreats even, they have 3-month retreats, not 3-week retreats. Rains retreats and things. And yeah, like a bit much for a beginner. So 3-4 hours tops, 1 or 2 hours, good target, I would say. Intermediate level, like good 40 minutes sit in the evening, maybe another one in the evening. Some people say, can I split it up into lots of 10 minutes? I'd say, yeah, it's better to go a bit deeper into it at least once, though the little what Shinzen calls micro hits throughout the day are also pretty helpful. All right, so we've got duration, technique. Now, intermediate meditation doesn't necessarily mean doing some weird esoteric technique. It could mean exploring, it could mean trying candle meditation or sound meditation or things that are a bit less common. However, normally it means doing the same techniques more skillfully. This is a very Asian concept. I've got this from martial arts myself. Yeah, like listen to Rob Bear's 10 hours of talks on breath meditation, or metta meditation. Like you can go into it for hours. I just listened to I think it's a 12-hour long YouTube series from Ajahn Sona on metta. I don't think he even gets to any of the other Brahma Viharas. They're the other heart practices, by the way. If you've only done metta, it might be worth looking at the other Brahma Viharas as a way to sort of broaden out your practice a little bit. The other thing I'd say, as well as deepening practice, refining it, doing it more skillfully, meditation can be done more or less skillfully. Okay, it is a skill, it can be learned, you can be better or worse at it. Difficult to say who's better and worse from the outside. Difficult to be, don't want to be snobby about that, but yeah, you can be better and worse at it. Where was I? Oh yes, life. So intermediate could also mean that you bring it more into life. That it's, I'll give you an example. I was walking back. I was listening to a metta podcast in the gym today, lifting weights, and I actually find it something I can do metta while lifting weights. Walking home, just doing metta while walking along. People would pass me. I was just thinking, remember a couple of old ladies who passed me this morning. It's nice, bringing it more into your life, bringing it more into your work life. Sometimes we do that literally. We have a 5-minute meditation before our marketing meeting on a Monday morning. Not everyone works in a company like mine. Fair enough, but can you bring it into your work life? Can you bring it into your parenting? If not, what's the point in all that meditation you're doing in the morning, sitting on a cushion, staying on or whatever? It's pointless, isn't it? Yeah, so I'd recommend that. Okay, mental health. So I come back to that, didn't I? So mental health, beginner's meditation is generally very, very good for mental health. As you get more advanced, you might well find it sets off things, either trauma. I've had retreats I've been on where I've just been floods of tears. And we're talking for days, 2 or 3 days of crying as some sort of trauma just worked its way out. With the right holding, that can be fine. That can be helpful. It's kind of like draining the lake and seeing the shopping trolleys at the bottom of the lake, and all the garbage has been thrown in there as an analogy one teacher gave me once. So yeah, just be aware of that. And if you really up your meditation, be aware it can be disruptive rather than stabilizing. There's a lot of stuff out there on Dark Nights of the Soul now, not a lot, a bit. Is it Willoughby Britton? Looking at these transitional stages. I had a 3-month period where my entire body felt like liquid love, like golden bubbly champagne. Sounds nice. It was nice. Doing my taxes during that period, however, not so fucking easy. Okay. So there are often these stages that you go through. People like Daniel Ingram can help you work them out. He wrote a whole book on becoming enlightened. He's part of the movement which takes sort of supernormal states a bit more seriously. It might be worth thinking of actually getting a meditation coach. It's a kind of a new phenomena. Who can I recommend? Michael Taft or Miles Kessler, Kessler, or Taft, Taft. They're 2 people I can recommend. I'm sure there's dozens of others out there. They're both very qualified to help you through some of this stuff. I'm lucky. I've got 5 people on speed dial who all have very high experience. And a couple of times I've needed them. Not a lot, but a couple of times. And that can happen with intermediate practice. And certainly everyone I know who's meditated long-term seriously at some point has a major disruption to their mental health, emotional health, work life, family life, We're talking, stuff that really disrupts people to the point where they can't work effectively or whatever, right? That was lovely to be around for those 3 months, but fucking work-wise, not exactly productive. That shit happens. It is something different from just mental health crisis or trauma being put off, though maybe there's a crossover. People are still trying to work out, how that works. Without a monastic context, just bear it in mind, I would say. Bear it in mind. You've got to understand as well that, like, I said get a coach, but in some ways, for some people who are beginners, it's like, get a teacher. Don't just rely on an app or on YouTube or on talks on a podcast, right? But develop a relationship with a teacher, right? Like someone I've had a few of those in my life, some fairly serious, some a bit more casual. There's people like Shinzen who I could still call if I needed to, people that, I've really meditated with consistently for some time, other people. And develop those relationships. Develop Sangha as well. So, for example, Rob Bayer was someone who I studied with a bit, studied with a lot online, without him knowing all the talks and stuff, still am. But 2 of his top students, the friends of mine, Lawrence and Dr. Rob, I can call them for advice. They're part of his little Sangha. They're people I'm still in touch with. And then, of course, there's much bigger communities. Some friends of mine are a big part of the Triratna community, which has many centres in Britain, for example. Some people give it a hard time and maybe it's not perfect, but those people have real community, have real elders. They have, they teach in a way that helps people. Their practice is in a system. Their practice is in a community. Both of those things are helpful. So you might well want to consider that as your meditation journey becomes, a little bit more serious. By serious, by the way, I don't mean like taking it seriously. Hopefully, you'll get more playful and happy as well. So mental health stuff, a couple of that, community, the bigger systems, maybe looking at more techniques, maybe branching out into the sort of the Theravadan lists or the Tibetan esoterica or the Zen koans or something like that. Maybe just deepening the practice in terms of retreats and hours and those kind of things. There's my thoughts. I mean, I genuinely want to get your thoughts on it. So if you're on a podcast, pop over to YouTube or Instagram and have a look on there. It's not just the way I get you over. Like, I haven't worked this out. Like, I was in many ways thinking out loud doing this because I sort of bumped into this issue with my students where they didn't know about certain things I thought they did. And I've got more students that have done the basics now. So I'm sort of going, okay, what's best to offer them? They're not necessarily going, right, I want to go full enlightenment, I'm going to do 10 retreats a year, but they want something a little bit more. So anyway, let's have this conversation. Feedback to me if there's something useful here. What do you know about already? What don't you? This will be helpful for me. So thank you. And that's that. My Walsh here. If you like that, you'll probably like embodimentunlimited.com and our app. So on both of these things, you can get a bunch of podcasts that aren't available here, some exclusive ones with some big names, some people you'll probably recognize that are over there. There's a copy of my book, PDF, my first book on embodiment, which seems to people like. I sold quite a few copies on Amazon, but there's a free copy there. What else is there? Loads of videos of me coaching embodiment, resources on trauma, on meditation, on yoga. And you can also chat to people without going on Facebook or any of that nonsense. So if you want to chat embodiment with people, that's there. And it's on the embodimentunlimited.com, all free, and the app available at the App Store and all that good stuff. So if you like this, do check